at the church, we asked for prayer requests, and we got a new message from a lady named Karen. Are we broadcasting? Okay. I don't know if she watches the broadcast. That's how she got in touch with us. But we received a new message. Her name is Karen, and her message is this: my fiance's labor certification is being audited for his visa process. Please pray for everything to go well and the labor certification to be approved quickly. I like that. He's coming in. He wants to work. Good. That's exactly what we're after. He will also have to find a way to help with the expenses in his house. His brother left, and his dad doesn't make enough money with his job. If you can please pray for God to find him a way to keep up with their needs, perhaps with his 3 brothers helping a little bit. This is really stressful for him. So absolutely, we asked for prayer requests, and we got a prayer request. So we certainly want to pray for Karen. So who's doing our closing prayer? You're doing our closing prayer. Would you just remember Karen and the needs, so everybody knows what we're praying for? But I don't have any other information, but we have an email, so we'll send something. We'll, of course, send something to her and try to reach out to her. I don't know if she's local. I don't know. But I thought that was neat. We asked for prayer requests, and we got one. So that's good. Okay, let's go ahead and get into our, what's our closing song, brother? 772. 772? Okay. 772 is our closing song this afternoon. All right. Last week we talked about what? Who did we talk about last week? A couple things, right? Does anybody remember? We talked about... Okay. Uh-huh. Don't say that. Rich young ruler. Yep.
Okay. So my question is.
Oh, we got a question. All right.
That's a parable.
The rich young ruler? No, this is a rich young ruler. He actually was there. He talked to Jesus.
That's not a parable.
No, the rich young ruler, he came to Jesus and said, "What do I lack to inherit eternal life?" Is that the one we're talking about?
Yeah, but in my Bible it said a parable.
Oh.
That was my thing. I was going to say, Chuck, you're not going to be able to ask him that question.
Well, there was a rich young man, and he came to Jesus, and he asked him a point-blank question: What do I lack to inherit the kingdom of God? And he says, "Well, look at the commandments. What are the commandments? Da 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 da. And what about the law? Yeah, I've done all of these things. I've kept all of these things kept all these things from my childhood up." And he says, and of course, Jesus perceives the heart. He knew. If anything was going to keep this young man from accepting being a part of the kingdom of God, he said his problem was he had a great love for money. As a matter of fact, when he told him what would... Now remember, what he's telling him to do here, though, he's telling him this is a way that he can eliminate the problem, isn't it? When you love something so much that keeps you from God, what's the best thing to do? You got to get rid of it. And he even goes so far as to go almost into hyperbole. If your eye offend thee and cause you to sin to not inherit the kingdom of heaven, what do you do with it? You pluck it out. He's not telling us to self-mutilate, but he's saying you give up what's going to keep you from getting where you need to be. In this young man's life, it was his wealth that had become his focus rather than on God. This is a problem there for the Jews, though, that their religion had become one of ritual rather than of a love for God. To keep all the feasts, I keep all the commandments, but it's more of a compunction to follow the letter of the law. The Pharisees were like that. It was their love and compassion was gone. It was merely, this is the rule book. I'm going to follow the rule book. And that was an unfortunate thing for the young man because he was not.
But if you read a few verses after that, it says, to me, the moral is it's harder for a rich man to get to heaven than a camel to get through the eye of a needle.
Yes.
So that's why I thought it was a parable.
No, it's a true. This actually happened. And what do you mean by that? A lot of people, we said this last week, a lot of people look at that, and they start looking to historical things about there was a gate known as the eye of the needle, and a camel had to get down. That's not what it is. He's making this is a literal thing. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for, now is he engaging in exaggeration? Of course. Can a rich man go to heaven? Yes. Can a camel go through the eye of a needle? No. So he's engaged, this is the thing. Jesus engaged in hyperbole. He engaged in exaggeration, but his thing was to make a point. Jesus spoke about money more than any other earthly thing in the Scriptures. When we look at the idea of the parable of the talents, those were talents. That was money. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Jesus spoke about money all the time because their mindset was not where it needed to be. They heaped up from themselves more and more and more. A lot of his parables were about money, the love of it, anyway, you see where I'm going.
Even the crime today, with all this crime that's going on, usually it's somebody wanting to steal a purse or break in a store, do shoplifting, and it's always about money.
Mm-hmm.
Because even what they're shoplifting, they're selling to get money.
For the Jews, that you said before, their thing was if you had great wealth, it was because God favored you above other people.
Mm-hmm.
So
It was important. Their status and their wealth had become it's interesting. They got rid of the false gods of the Canaanites. They'd learned their lesson. When they came back from the carrying away and the destruction of Jerusalem and the being prisoners of the Babylonians, when they came back, they had basically gotten rid of the idolatry, the physical idolatry, the statues and all of the stuff that they were worshiping, but they'd allowed other things to still come in place of God. Their idol was wealth, and unfortunately, they tied that into God as if God cares about whether we're wealthy or not. Well, if you're wealthy, God obviously cares about you. And that's not the case. Man, God has allowed, I won't say caused, but God has allowed very wicked people to get very wealthy. And He's allowed very great people, good, decent, God-fearing, honest Christians to remain in poverty. But that tells us that God doesn't really care that much about money. So neither should we, at least not to the point where it would affect our relationship with Him. And He's telling this rich young ruler, look, this is going to be your handicap. This is what's going to keep you from the kingdom of heaven. Give it up now. And it says he went away sorrowing. Because he had great wealth, and he just could not see himself pulling that trigger, because that's what it was going to take for him. And was Jesus right? It was kind of like not to use the word self-fulfilling prophecy, but that's essentially what it had come down to. He didn't want to give it up. So Jesus was exactly correct. That was going to be that was the albatross around his neck. So, all right. Speaking of money, and this is kind of like another little thing. Let's go to Matthew chapter 20, because that's where we're going to get most of our lesson from today. We'll get a little bit more into it, but out of a little bit further. We are very close to Jesus' last Passover and his betrayal and death and burial and resurrection. So we're not too far away from all of that. I know it seems like we've been in this for a long time, and we have, but I enjoyed this study. All right, so in Matthew chapter 20, this is the laborers in the vineyard. Now, there's a lot of different ways to look at this, but I believe that there's one that's probably the most correct. Let's just say the most correct way of looking at this. So let's look at this. Speaking, tell you what, there was for the kingdom of heaven. All right. Let's just say the holy, the elect church is equal to, and here we go. All right. So for the kingdom of heaven here is like the master of a house. Now, when we look at parables, who is the master? Almost invariably, who is the master? God. Jehovah God. All right. Is like the master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarius, some translations say penny. Anybody say penny? Does anybody say shilling? Doesn't really matter. It's just a unit of money. It could be anything. For us, it could be $1. If he were writing it today, if he were writing and using the English language exclusively, he might use the word dollar. It doesn't really matter, because the point is he agreed with them for a particular amount of money, whatever it might be. All right? So he agrees with them, and this is an interesting thing. The first people that he hires, the first people that he sends into his vineyards, he agrees with them for a particular wage. That's important, all right? So he agrees with them for a denarius a day, and he sends them into his vineyard. And going out about the third hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. Now, in the third hour was about 9 o'clock in the morning. All right, 6 o'clock started the day. So at 9 in the morning, he goes and he sees others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, you go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right, I will give you. So now with the first group of people, he had an agreement, let's say a verbal contract, right? He agreed with them for the pay, a denarius a day, a penny a day, a shilling a day, $1 a day, whatever it is. With the second group of people, what does he tell them? I'm going to give you what's right. All right, so now when this second group of people, what are they now? The first people had a contract, essentially a verbal contract. The second group of people are doing what? What do they have to have in this homeowner, this master, to pay them? What do they have to have in him? Faith, trust, right? Faith that he'll do what he says he's going to do. All right. Not an agreement, but simply they trust him. He says he's going to do what's right. That's what we're going to do. All right? So he says, you go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I will give you. So they went. Going out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour, so about 12 o'clock in the afternoon, about noon, and then 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he goes and he does the same thing. Now, about the 11th hour. Now, what's the 11th hour? Yeah. So almost at the end of the working day, because remember, the 6th hour was when everything ceased. And part of that went into the idea of the Sabbath day you would stop before preparations had to be made for the Sabbath day. So their day was from 6 until 6, from 6 until 6. So the 11th hour of the day, what does he do? He goes out and he finds others standing. And he says to them, why do you stand here idle all day? And they said to him, because no one has hired us. So he said to them, you go into the vineyard too. Now, from what we understand, the second group of people, the third group of people, the fourth group of people, and even the fifth group of people simply have a verbal acknowledgement that he is going to do what he says he's going to do. I will pay you what is right. All right? And when evening came, which is for the people of the 11th hour, how long did they work in there? An hour. They worked an hour. When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, now the foreman could likely liken to Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ is going to be the one that does the reckoning. When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first. Now that's interesting. He doesn't go with the first group of people and give them their pay. He calls the very last people that were hired, and he gives them their pay. And when those who hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius, a penny, a shilling, $1, whatever it was. Same amount that was agreed upon verbally with the first group of people that went into the field. Now, when those hired first came, they thought that they would receive more. But each of them also received a denarius, a penny, a shilling, $1, whatever it might be. And on receiving it, what did they do at the master of the house? They complained. Some translations say grumbled. Okay? All the same, they were whining about the fact that the people who were hired last, apparently they saw them receive their $1, penny, shilling, denarius, whatever it might be. They saw them receive that. So they're thinking, oh man, if he paid these guys, they worked an hour. If he paid them if he paid them what he agreed upon with us, surely then he's going to make, he's going to do a little bit better for us. We've been working all day long, out there all day long working in his field. But they grumbled at him, saying, these last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. But he replied to one of them, friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for denarius? Well, it's a good question. Did they? Yeah, they absolutely did. They acknowledged the agreement. They went into the field knowing full well that they were going to receive a denarius. And here's the thing. Had they not seen the reward of the others, they would have received their denarius and went away perfectly happy. But they saw him giving the others the same amount that they were supposed to receive. Now they're upset because they feel that they are due more. Now, are they? No, absolutely not. An agreement is an agreement is agreement, because he says this. He says, take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last worker as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? And I think this is the sticking point here. Are you begrudging me my generosity? It acknowledges that this master, a denarius was a perfectly acceptable day's wage. That was the normal thing for someone who worked with their hands and went into the fields and did all of these things no matter what it was. If you worked physical labor, a denarius was a perfectly acceptable amount of money to receive. Remember, the daily wage was important for the Jews at that particular point in time. The idea of being paid monthly or yearly was just not something that was typical. Yes, ma'am.
I think he was being generous with the last sacrifice.
Absolutely.
Worked 1 hour, and they didn't have the heat running for 1 hour.
Exactly. And that's the thing is he wasn't stingy with the first people who were hired. That was a day's wage. That was perfectly acceptable day's wage. To receive a denarius that was typical. And that's what he agreed with them upon when they first said that they would go in. Remember, they accepted the job. He didn't force them to go take his wage. He went out there, they were looking for work. He gave them work and they went into the field and he paid them what was perfectly normal and acceptable day's wage in that day and time. What he is doing with the ones who were hired last, he's being incredibly generous with the ones who were hired at the last. And it goes to his what he says. He says, do you begrudge me my own generosity? You don't hear the man say the things, but you can almost sense a sense of maybe a tone of disapproval creeping into his voice. How dare you tell me what I'm to do with what is mine? It's mine to do with as I wish. If I choose to give this one who's worked an hour the same amount that I give you, then that's for me to do and not for you to grumble about. But again, that goes back to human nature. What are we? We have our own innate sense of fairness, don't we? We know in our human mind what is just and what is right. And rather than simply accept that this one person is being extra generous to someone else, we feel these people who are hired first somehow felt that they were defrauded. We should have received more. Well, no. Anyway, let's finish this. Let's finish what it says. It says, do you begrudge me my generosity? So the last will be first and the first will be last. Okay, so here we have this parable. And yes, ma'am, do you have something else?
I was thinking about people that were yet saved at a short notice, accept Jesus Christ as the gift of salvation, and you have those that accepted salvation years and years before them, but they were still getting into heaven.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings me to what I see as an even longer plan. Here you have, and here, if I don't write it out, my train will derail. All right. So we look at this. Let's look at this from, like you said, from an age standpoint, and this is very real. So you have people who come to Christ at a very young age, 13, 14, sometimes younger. But they're young people, all right? So they come to Christ young in years. All right, so what do? They become a Christian at 13, 12, 13, 14, whatever it might be. Let's go a little bit older. Say you come to Christ at 21, 22, 23. Say you come to Christ at 30. And then you live this long life in Jesus. Okay, and you go through all of the things that come along with being a member of the Lord's church, all of the day-to-day and the year-to-year struggle of being a member of the Lord's church. All right, you deprive yourself of things that the world loves to grab a hold of and they love to engage in. And you say, I'm not going to do that because I want to remain true, I want to remain pure, I want my garments to remain spotless so that when Jesus comes back, I'm not found wanting. And that's a very real look at this parable. So you have someone who's young in years and they go this long lifespan, all right? And they die at a ripe old age of being a mature Christian. Say they die in their 90s. All right? Nice long lifespan, having gone through all of the troubles and trials and turmoil of living a nice long lifespan. Okay? And that's a very real possibility. Then you've got someone, and I know someone who became a New Testament Christian at 90 years old. His family had been members of the church. He wasn't unfamiliar with the church, but he had just not yet made the decision. And it wasn't until he got a little bit older that he really started to think, listen, not everybody's as quick on the uptake. And he started to really think about it, really think about it. He became a New Testament Christian. He lived for about another 4 years, but those 4 years, he did what he could in his own way to try to make up for the years that he deprived God of his service. Pure and simple. And he said that. He said, I have a lot of catching up to do. He said, I have cheated God out of my entire life that I could have been of service to Him, and I didn't do anything. I didn't keep my family from doing anything, but I wasn't doing anything. He says, I'm embarrassed, and he said, I just pray that God will forgive me. I said, well, of course He has. But He wants you to be of service. I don't care if you're 90 years old, you become a Christian at 90, you still got some time, you do something. You don't just say, well, I got in underneath the door right before the door closes, I'm good, and because God's not going to accept that. He doesn't accept a deathbed confession simply because now you're scared of going to hell. That's not what works. He wants a genuinely penitent heart to come to Him. All right? So then you've got somebody in there, and say they're well, let's say in their 90s, okay? And they live this long life where they were no service to God. And we could certainly see that in this parable, can't we? We certainly can. Is this person going to get the reward? What's the reward? There's only one, right, by the way? There's one reward. There's a home in heaven. Eternal life with God in heaven. That's the reward for everybody. Well, this person's going to get it, man. They have worked and they've worked. They may have served as a preacher or an elder or a deacon, a Bible school teacher, or whatever it might be. They've done. They're an evangelist. They did all of this stuff, and they worked their rear ends off for, 70 years, 80 years. All right. Then you got this person who was of no service to God, but as far as the parable is concerned, for the 1 hour, and it was nice and cool. And they're probably mainly trimming everything up and bringing the harvest in there. They're not working in the hot. They're not working in the sweat and the heat of the day and the just this oppressive environment. They skate in and they become Christians right at the end of their lives. But they're sincere. They're genuine. They want to go to work, but no one has hired them. So they go in. Are they going to get the same reward? Now, if this person up here could start saying, well, that's not fair. And believe me, surprisingly enough, there were people after that man became a Christian, there were those who they grumbled a little bit. Well, I guess he got in just in time. He figured that out, and and there was a little bit of criticism, and of course, the people who heard it had to stop that in its tracks. Can't do that. Listen. Who am I to judge another man's servants? That's God knows his heart. I have nothing but respect for someone who will do that. Even if I wished he had made this decision, he at least made this decision. It's better to go to work in the vineyard for an hour than to never go to work in the vineyard at all. Now, let's look at this. Now, we got to be careful because we're might step on some toes in the end of the second part of this. Let's look at this in another way. See. About 34 AD, the Lord's church was established. And there were people who were hired to go into the vineyard the early part of the day. And they worked, and they worked, and they worked. And what happened to some of them? They were stoned. They were flogged. They were shipwrecked. They were crucified. They were beheaded. They were persecuted. They lost family. They lost their livelihoods. These are the people that started right here. We started right here. Who's born the heat of the day? These folks right here. I mean, have I been persecuted in the name of Christ? In sometimes in the most minor ways. The stuff that I could easily shrug off and say, you know what, that's just ignorance talking. Not going to worry about that. That is not going to be a problem for me. If they don't like me, they don't like what I say, then I'll live and I'll go on to talk to someone else about it. All right? And here we are. We're working in this part of the time frame of this world. We're working in the 11th hour, because most of us are going to die and go on to our reward, having never suffered in the manner in which those people who were hired first had to suffer. We're not. So there's two ways of looking at the parable, and both of them are equally valid. I think both of them have incredible points in the parable. The idea here is that the Lord is less concerned about when you come. It's kind of like where Jesus makes the statement. He asked his disciples. He said, a man calls his two sons to go. He says to one, go into the vineyard, and he said, I will, but then he didn't go. And he says to one, he says, I will not, but later on he repented and went. Which one of those did the will of his father? The one who went. It doesn't matter if he went after the fact or if he went later on in the day. He eventually said, I've changed my mind. My father asked me to do something. I'm going to go do it. But one said, I will, and then, absconded. He's out. It's kind of like a kid. You say, hey, I need you to go clean your room. And the next thing you see, they're playing with a neighbor kid down the street. He's like, hold on. I told you to go do something, But what does God want from us? God wants our service. And does it matter to him? He wants us to go at the first part of the day. He wants us to go into the vineyard. He calls us now. But even if we go in the 11th hour, we repented and went. Well, we did the will of our Father. Jesus even, in fact, says that very specifically. He says that. All right. The whole point is we are supposed to be in the vineyard and we're supposed to be working. And whether we go for our entire lives or whether we go for an hour, the Lord is generous, because he could just as easily say, well, I'm either going to give this person, I'm going to give those first people more, or I'm going to give you less. But instead he says, everyone who goes into my vineyard and works until the close of the day is going to be paid the same thing.
But he looks at the heart.
Of course. And if the people who went into the vineyard, it would have been easy for them to say, I will go, but then they say, denarius, that's not worth much. And you imagine there are probably some who will do that. Denarius isn't worth it. I just as soon sit at home. And there's a case to be made in this parable about, he says, why have you been standing idle all day long? He says, well, no one's hired us. He says, I was here at the first part of the day, and I didn't see you here. Everyone that he saw, he sent into the vineyard. But now you have people who show up a little bit later on in the day. He's like, wanted to sleep in a little bit. Now he goes at noon, and you got more people standing around in the marketplace. He says, well, has no one hired you? No one's hired you. Well, I was here, and I didn't see you here, but that's okay. That's okay. I still want you to go work, which means that God's grace and mercy is even greater for those who came a little bit later on. I'm glad he has that kind of mercy towards me. I know he says he's being generous. So whatever it is, it's his to do with as he wishes. It's his home to share with us for eternity. It's God's heaven. He's invited us, and he wants us to be there. But it's his to do with. He could have made any qualifications that he wanted to end up with him. Whatever he says is what's going to be held. We're going to be held accountable to. In this case, for him, to receive that denarius, you had to have worked in the vineyard. And to him, it didn't matter if you'd been there all day long or if you'd been there at the 11th hour. Everyone's going to receive that same amount. Now, some people might grumble and say, well, I should be paid more. Or, hey, we got a denarius. Those guys shouldn't get a denarius. They should at most they should get a couple of mites. But God says, that's not for you to determine. That's not for you to judge. I'm giving you what is right. And that's the good thing about it is whatever God sees fit to give us is always going to be what? Appropriate. It's always going to be what's right because God is justice personified. So is he being generous? Yes, but that's for him to do. And it's what's right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. At the last minute. Mm-hmm. What's that work? We talk about that all the time.
Yeah.
How much would you pay?
Yeah.
And you think about the souls that are being won in India. How much money is being invested to accomplish that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean,
we don't do dollar cost averaging in the church.
No.
No. I'm saying that there were some that say, well, we're sending this much and we're only saving 300 souls with this X amount of dollars. I'm thinking I can't think of a better reason to send whatever dollar amount it is.
Think about what we spend.
Well, let's think about that for just a second because that gets right back into the idea of the parable. Remember what a denarius was. It was a day's wage. So if some man goes into the vineyard, say he couldn't get to the marketplace. Say he wasn't able to get to the marketplace, but he shows up and he's willing to work for that hour for whatever the man is willing to pay. But still, what is he going to be able to do to go back home? When he goes back home to his family that day, what is he going to have in his pocket? A day's wage to provide for his family. So yes, is he being generous? Yes, but is he also giving that man what he needs in order to go back home to his family? Yes, I have a day's wage in my pocket. I can buy food, I can get water, I can do all of these things that are necessary for my family. So again, is he being generous? Yes, but is he giving us is he giving that man what he needed? Yes, he needed a day's wage. Even if he only worked an hour, he needed a day's wage. So God is cognizant of that. Is he always going to give us what's right and what's fair? Absolutely. And that's really one of the key points behind the parable in the first place. Mm-hmm. No, it's unmerited. Salvation is unmerited. You think about it, the physical act of going down into the water physically doesn't accomplish anything. All right, to go down into the water physically, it doesn't do anything physically. It's the effect that it has on our soul. So even if God said, listen, and see, God would be well within his rights to say, listen, in order to get my salvation, I'm going to require that you go and you do some, remember that's what Naaman thought was going to happen, right? He says, just go down into the water. He said, I thought he was going to come out and speak some great words or command me to do some great thing. Now here's the thing, is Naaman would have been perfectly fine if the prophet had come out and said, okay, in order to have yourself cleansed of this leprosy, I want you to go and bring me the heads of 100 Philistines. What would Naaman have done? Gotten on his horse, charged right into Philistia, and proceeded to behead 100 people and bring it back those heads in bags and drop them before the prophet, if that's what it meant to take away his leprosy. And see, that's the idea of a works-based salvation, that you have to do something. And see, that's what a lot of people accuse us of when we tell them that you have to be baptized. Well, that's a works-based. It's not works. That has nothing to do with it. It's not works-based. But that's the mindset. That's the mindset. But we don't do anything to achieve our own salvation. We obey a command, but that's not the same thing as doing something, as in, like, if hey, I want you to go and I want you to accomplish this task and this task and this task and this task. It's the simplest thing in the world to do. And it's something that almost anywhere in the world can do. There's very few places where there is not water to be baptized. So it's a great, but you're right, we don't merit our own salvation. We merit it because God extends us grace and mercy. And he says, this is what I want you to do. But if you think for 1 second that you can somehow, because of who you are and what you think you can do for me, that you're saved, that just doesn't work. Yeah, ma'am.
I always think about the serpent on the staff when people try to claim that baptism is work. And it is work, it's just not my work. It's
Yeah.
his work. Like the serpent on the staff, the people, they didn't save themselves by going to the serpent on the staff and looking upon it.
Right.
It was God who saved them through their obedience.
Right. If God commands the work, then I can't really call that. That would be saying, Lord, this is what I'm going to do for you in order to be saved. I'm going to do this, and by doing so, I will have earned my salvation. That's a far cry from saying, Lord, what do you want me to do? And if I do that, you say you're going to cleanse me of my sin. That's a whole different matter than the idea of a works-based, which means to think that I can earn it somehow by being a good person. I can be the best person I can. Cornelius was a good man, wasn't he? He wasn't saved. He wasn't saved. He was a righteous man, but he wasn't saved. Yeah.
And you think about Naaman going into that filthy water to be cleansed of leprosy.
Yeah.
It's not like it was a pure flowing river.
Yeah.
It was a sewage system.
Jordan was not a pretty, even at that time, was not a pretty water system, no.
Yeah, so for people that, it's not like Naaman could have said, I've cured myself by going into this water. Well,
Mhm.
it was the obedience that, God cured him.
Absolutely right. We can't earn it, but we can achieve it through doing what God tells us to do, and that's the only way. All right. All right. We look at three different. We're not going to look at all of the different translations, but somebody want to turn to Luke chapter 18. Luke 18 verses 31 through 34. Let me get this up here, and then I want you to read it for me. Just give me a second. We have. All right, Luke chapter 18, verses 31 through 34. Whoever's got that, go ahead and read it.
Then he took the 12 aside and said to them, Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and all things which are written through the prophets about the Son of Man will be accomplished. For he will be handed over to the Gentiles, and will be mocked and mistreated and spit upon. And after they have scourged him, they will kill him, and the third day he will rise again. But the disciples...
No, I'm sorry. Go. I'm sorry. I thought you were done. Go ahead.
But the disciples understood none of these things, and the meaning of this statement was hidden from them, and they did not comprehend the things that were said.
Okay. Now, when we read this, where it says that he began to tell them what was going to happen, it does not mean that he said, listen, this is what's going to happen. We're going to go into Jerusalem, and then one of you is going to betray me, and then I'm going to be taken into custody. It simply says that he told them these things. It does not give the manner in which he told these things, because it says they didn't understand. So how he said these words, we're not sure. He simply told them what was going to happen. But remember, he had been talking about this for quite some time, about what was going to, what his eventual, I hate to use the word fate. I want to make sure we understand what we mean by fate. But what his eventuality was going to be on this earth. He'd been telling them this for many days. But now he's begun to be more bold and telling them what's going to happen. So he tells them what's going to occur when they go up to Jerusalem. It does not tell us how he said those things, because it says they still didn't quite understand. So it could have still been, they could still be thinking, he could have been still speaking of this in a figurative sense. But it says they did not understand. Now, that was going to be very clear in a very short period of time. It was going to unfold before their eyes. And again, sometimes we hear things and we don't quite get them until they actually come into play. Has anybody ever heard of the term Chekhov's gun? Okay, it's a stage term. a stage and film term. Essentially, it means this. And Chekhov's, Anton Chekhov was a playwright. And he wrote these plays, and the idea of Chekhov's gun was, it's a standard. And it says this: if a gun, literally a gun, makes its way onto the stage and is shown to the audience in the first act, by the third act, that gun will have to be used in some way, shape, or form. It's going to make a reoccurrence. So in this sense, we're thinking about Jesus' words being in much the same way. He began talking to his disciples about this long ago, what was going to happen to the Son of Man. And he told them these things, but many times he spoke to them in figurative language where it was very difficult. They didn't understand. The idea, remember, they thought of him as a king. This is a man who was going to come into power. So when he goes into Jerusalem, it's going to be to finally take the throne of David, to put his enemies under his feet, to drive out the Romans and reestablish Israel as this shining kingdom on the hill. That's their mindset. So when he's talking to them about all of these things, this is their idea. This is what Jesus is. He is a warrior king. Right now, he's biding his time. He's gathering his army, these disciples, and pretty soon he's going to make that play, and it's going to be for us to hit the ground running and start doing our fighting. I believe this is what Peter was doing in that garden when he tried to strike I believe he was trying to strike the high priest with a sword and ended up slipping and cutting off Malchus's ear. Peter says, the time is right. This is it. We're making our move. And Jesus says, put away your sword. He's making this monumental statement to Peter. This is not my kingdom. My kingdom is not one of the sword. My kingdom is not, we're not here to overthrow the high priest. We're not here to overthrow the Romans. That's not what my kingdom is. But that's what their mindset was. You can imagine when he says, does anyone have a weapon? So they're thinking, oh, this is it. Now, these men were not warriors. These people were not fighters. But they were willing to do whatever Jesus said. If he says, pick up a sword and start swinging, then that's what we're going to do. But they still didn't have the mindset that Jesus had. So Jesus, as he's standing in that garden, and they come and they begin to seize him, Peter thinks, this is it. So he unsheathed the sword, starts swinging, cuts off an ear, and Jesus says, put away your sword. And then not only that, he puts the ear back on the man. Because remember, at this point, their mind is not yet of the kingdom of God. They've been spoken to in signs, and they've been spoken to in parables. But Jesus is trying to prepare them for what this eventuality was. And here's the great thing. When it finally came, that little light bulb figuratively and literally went up over their head. Now we understand. Now we get it. This is the kingdom, not a kingdom of the sword, not a kingdom of overthrowing the government, not in the kingdom of reestablishing the throne of Israel. It's a different kingdom. It's the kingdom of God, and it's a kingdom of love and mercy and pardon and forgiveness. This is what it's going to be. And once they finally realized that and saw the power of God coming, that day of the Lord on the day of Pentecost, they finally eased into it and realized for the first time, maybe for the first time. And boy, from that point on, there was nothing holding back the church. Nothing holding back the church. Once they finally realized it wasn't what they thought it was, this is what it's going to be. And they went forward from that point on. So anyway, he's going up to Jerusalem. He says, we're going to go up to Jerusalem, and this is what's going to happen. Again, we don't know what that language was, but if they misunderstood that, then he must have been speaking and still speaking in signs and not telling them, literally, I'm going to die. I'm going to be sacrificed on the cross, and there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing you're supposed to do about it. They misunderstood it even then. But remember, it's not going to be very long before it's going to be abundantly clear exactly what he was talking about. And you think maybe after the rubber hits the road and everything happens, then they start thinking, that's what he meant by that. Now we get it. And especially when the Holy Spirit came, he says, I'm going to bring to remembrance everything that I taught you. He's going to make everything clear. He's going to guide you into all righteousness. He's going to be a reminder of everything that I've told you. That's when finally it just clicks. And when it did, it was just no holds barred. It didn't stop. But anyway, the same account is found in all of these three scriptures. It's all talking about the coming of the kingdom and what's going to occur. What's going to happen to Jesus in order for this to happen. The kingdom can't happen until after he's passed, so he's going to have to die. You know, and I don't know if they thought he was going to die in some frontal attack on the Romans or what was exactly what was going to happen. But I don't believe, now I may be wrong, but I don't believe they thought that he was going to be crucified on a cross by the Roman authorities at the behest of the Jews. I don't think that was in their mindset. You know, maybe he's going to die in a blaze of glory. Don't know. But they didn't understand it. I mean, it says very clearly. They were completely mistaken about what was going on. They were unsure of exactly what he meant when he says all of these things. Hey, listen, you know what? That's okay. That's okay. A lot of times we're not completely clear on scriptures. We misunderstand something. Sometimes we misinterpret something. The point is, are we willing to have correction brought in and willing to be corrected on our misunderstandings so that we can have a better understanding? Now, what would have happened if they had taken Jesus and crucified him and the apostles said, okay, hang on, let's get together. You know what? We're not going to stand for this. We're not going to stand for this. Let's get a bunch of us and let's march down and listen, if he's going to die, we're all going to die. We're all going to go out in a blaze of glory. Is that what Jesus wanted for these men? No, absolutely not. Keep them safe. Yeah. Is there going to be sheep without a shepherd? And this, you know, they need protection. But this is, again, what did he say? Was the Holy Spirit, go to Jerusalem and there you will be told what to do. Don't make foolish plans by yourself. Don't think that you have any wisdom in this yet. Go to Jerusalem and you'll be told what to do. The Holy Spirit, sure enough, told them exactly what to do, and they did it. This is one of the great moments. You can breathe a sigh of, you know, because what we're leading up to is the death of the Savior. And there's not a bit of that inside of that makes us feel good. Everything that's going to happen, we don't feel good about it. But then when after he goes back to his Father and the Holy Spirit comes and gives them instruction, that's when okay, we can breathe now because now we know what he meant. Now we understand. We had it all wrong. We were thinking it was going to be this. It's not going to be that. It's going to be this, which is way better. You know, if they'd all died in a blaze of glory, well, there'd be stories told about them, but what would happen to the church? God would raise up another church, but those men would have leaned on their own understanding and died in their error, and that would have been a horrible thing to have happen. All right, let's go for a couple more minutes, and then we'll finish up. There's a couple things. In Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 10, the only account that we have of this one. Everybody knows this one, right? From the children's song. Yeah. All right, they're getting ready to head back to Jerusalem. They've been making this big circuit. And they've been going to all of the villages, and in some cases they're going through for the second time. Sometimes, some of these even the third time. But now he enters through Jericho, and he's passing through Jericho. So they're on their way back to eventually their final destination, literally, is Jerusalem. But they enter through Jericho, and they were passing through Jericho. And behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus was a chief tax collector and was rich. So the idea of a chief tax collector is he was in charge of several. He was the head guy over several tax collectors, probably within that city or within that region. Now, if the regular tax collectors were getting rich off of the Jews, you can imagine what the chief tax collector, because he got a little bit of everything. He wet his beak quite a bit in what was being taken up from his fellow Jews. But he was a chief tax collector and was rich. Again, it seems to be a recurring thing. Jesus is having to confront a lot of people in their wealth and how they got it and what they're doing with it. What's that? Yeah, well, at the very end of the story, he talks about how he got it and what he needed to do with it. I mean, he makes it abundantly clear. And it's interesting that Jesus doesn't, when you hear where Jesus tells him to do these things, he realizes that he needs to do them because of the issue that he has in his life. Let's look at it. He says, he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not because he was small in stature, right? A wee little man was he. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, now he didn't know who Jesus was. He had heard of him, but he wanted to see who he was. Who is this Jesus? So apparently the crowd around Jesus at this point in time is growing. It's fairly sizable at this point. So he's got a pretty good entourage that's following him. But when he gets to the place, he looks up and he says to them, Zacchaeus, hurry up and come down, for I must stay at your house today. Remember, who was the physician sent to? Wasn't sent to the ones who had no need of one, right? Physician was sent to the ones who were sick, not to the ones who were well. So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. Now remember, no good deed goes unpunished, right? You heard that saying. No good deed goes unpunished. So what do we find immediately after this in verse 7? They saw it and they all grumbled. They grumbled, they complained, they whined. What do they say? He has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. Now I wonder if this was partially jealousy. Why didn't Jesus come to my house? But remember who Jesus was sent to. He was sent to those who were sick. Zacchaeus was very sick, not physically, but spiritually. This is a man who had betrayed his fellow Jews, who was taking more than he was entitled to, and apparently was not doing with his wealth what he ought to do with his wealth. First thing is he shouldn't have the wealth that he's got because of the way he got it. But the second is, even if you were wealthy and you did it by completely honest and ethical means, what did you need to be doing with the wealth that God has blessed you with? You need to be doing something productive with it, something that is positive, something that is beneficial to your fellow man. That's what you need to be doing with it. All right? So he's gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, and I don't know, I'm not having a supposition about what's going on in here. I'm not positing anything that we don't find in here. But I'm wondering if when Jesus comes to his house, before Zacchaeus will even let him in his house, he makes this pronouncement to God. I don't know. It could be that Jesus was in there and was speaking to him about the kingdom of heaven and all of the things and the sin, what sinners need to do, how they need to make things right, how they need to come back to God. I don't know. We don't know any of this. But it says here that Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. Now, this is no small repentance on Zacchaeus' part. Think about it. Half of everything I've got, I'm giving to the poor. Well, Jesus is like, well, that's good. That's about right. That's what you need to be doing. Then he says this, if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. What is this going to do to Zacchaeus' wealth? Yeah.
Well, just think about how much wealth he got from these people if he's able to pay it back fourfold.
This is not a man he is not having problems financially.
I have a problem with Zacchaeus a lot because he's like the government because, he says, he'll give half of all of his money to the poor. You should give it to the poor people that you created.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is he says, if I've defrauded anybody. Now, here's the interesting thing, because I always like to look at this kind of thing, and we don't think about it at that point in time. They said one of the things that the Romans brought is order. They brought order to the places where they were, and the Roman records and even the minutia of Roman government, the bureaucracy of Rome was it. They said it may even dwarf ours, which I have a serious doubts about. But it says that it even dwarfs the bureaucracy that we find in our own government. But they said the record keeping was one of the things, the preciseness. So if this man was hired by the Roman government to collect taxes or be over the tax collectors, this is a guy who kept accurate records. This is what I got, and this is who I got it from, and this is how much is owed, so forth and so on. The fact that he was able to go back and find the people that he had defrauded, and not just pay them back what he took. I'm going to restore what I stole from them 4 times. That's just it goes to show what a truly penitent heart is capable of. Because sometimes we just say, "Well, I won't ever do that again." That's great, but let's be honest. Sometimes we have harmed people, and we need to find out what we need to do to make it right. Not just to clear the board, not just simply say, well, I won't ever do that again. See, it would have been easy for Zacchaeus to say, I will never, ever, ever defraud anyone ever again. He says, if I've defrauded anybody, I'm going to repay it. Not just once, not twice, not 3 times, 4 times. Yeah?
I have a problem with his use of the word if, because
Oh, yeah.
he knows, like, so
Sure.
it's almost like a half-hearted admission of guilt. Because I did research on this a long time ago. In order to get the position that he had, it was an appointed position, and pretty much the person who got that job was whoever could guarantee a certain amount of money.
Yep.
And it was a bidding war against you and a bunch of other people
Yep.
who said, well, I can squeeze even more money
Yep.
out of them. And so whatever they agreed to give to Rome, they got to keep whatever additional. So if he said like 10% from the people, but he was taking 15%, he got to keep the 5.
Yeah. And Rome didn't care. Rome said, they said, this is what we believe that we should be receiving from this district. This is what we have to have. If there's anything extra, we don't care. Keep it. As we said, bureaucracy was really great for the Romans. So was fraud and corruption. And they didn't really care. Again, as long as Rome got what they were supposed to get, they didn't care how it was gotten. They didn't care who they got it from. The only people that were exempt from taxation were the Romans. Any Roman living in a foreign land was exempt from taxation. Okay, so they didn't care who you got it from, how you got it, as long as you got it to them. I'll go this. I understand because there's a little bit of frustration with Zacchaeus. I'm going to look at it this way, and what I'm going to say is, if he saw somebody and he had defrauded them, he'll give them back the 4 times. I'm just going to be a little more charitable. If I've defrauded that guy, I'm going to give him back 4 times. If I've defrauded that guy, I'm going to give him back 4 times. Because I agree. There's no way he could stand before God or before Jesus and say, if I've done anything wrong, I'll take care of it. Because look what happens. As we said, look at what a penitent heart will cause us to do. It'll cause us not simply just to make it even, but we'll go overboard to try to make it right. Okay? You can imagine. Let me ask you this. Once the word got out of Zacchaeus' transformation, what's his standing in the community now? Before, he was a hated man. He would have been hated, pure and simple. What's Zacchaeus' stand now? That when they see him do what he says he's going to do, where is his standing now? For one thing, he's not going to defraud them anymore. I'm going to collect the taxes, but only what is owed, not what I can get out of you. And look at all the poor. I'm going to provide food. How much wealth you think about what a denarius was able to buy. It was a day's wage. How many denarii did this man have? He could take care of everybody for a long period of time. This is what he's going to do. Because look what happens. The next verse, in verse 9. Look at this. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house. That was what was keeping you. Now, I find this interesting because you look at his response to Jesus' teaching and look at the response of the rich young ruler to Jesus' teaching. The rich young ruler went away sorrowful because he had a lot of possessions. And he had gotten them, from what we understand, for all we know, he had gotten them rightfully. He was just a wealthy person. He had made good decisions. He had done business well, and he had been blessed. And he says, I can't do it. I can't do it. And here's Zacchaeus. He says, look, because of my sin, I'm going to give up half of everything that I've got. And if I've defrauded you, I'm giving you back 4 times. And I'm hoping, and maybe I'm giving Zacchaeus more credit. I mean, Jesus gives him the credit for this, but I'm giving Zacchaeus credit that when Jesus went out that door, Zacchaeus goes and he starts opening up his ledger book. And he starts saying, okay, I know this person I've defrauded. I'm going to go after. Yes.
But didn't Zacchaeus have taxpayers working for him, going to get the money, bringing it to him?
Yes.
He didn't actually go out and get money from people. Other people did that.
Yeah, and I don't know the intricacies of the tax collection. That's one thing I am not completely aware of. But I do know that all Zacchaeus can do is what he's responsible for. All right? That's all we can go with. But we do know this. He certainly has defrauded people. He certainly has not behaved with his wealth what he should be doing. He hasn't done with his wealth what he should be doing with his wealth. And his wealth, his desire, remember, you had to be, as Kenny said, you had to bargain for that position. And you had to say, listen, I'm able to get this much. So where was his mindset? This is where it was. It was all about the shekels.
And he was the one that was controlling the tax collectors that worked for him.
Yeah.
To say, hey, your district needs to generate this much money.
You're short this month. You need, I don't know what you got to do, but you got to, because Rome, remember at this point, is demanding ever more tribute. Every year the taxes would go up. That sounds familiar. Every year the taxes were going up, and let's be honest, the tax money it wasn't recirculated within the community. Those tax dollars were gathered up and sent to Rome for Rome to waste on wars and the lifestyle of the rich and famous and all of this. So these people were taking money out of their pockets to give to Rome to take far away, and they never received a dime of it. Okay, so this is a very real problem. So let's look at it this way. What else could Zacchaeus have done? Talk to his tax collectors and say, look, this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen. You collect exactly what is owed, and you're content with what you get out of that. But you're not, we're not going to have fraud anymore. All I can say is this. Jesus saw Zacchaeus' heart, and he made a pronouncement based on that. He says, salvation has come to this house. That thing that was preventing you from having the correct relationship with your brothers, your brethren, your kinsmen, and with the Lord, you've made that right. You've repented of that, and now you're going to do what's correct. Continuing on, since he also is a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man again came to what? Seek and save the lost. Zacchaeus was lost. He's been found. He's the prodigal son, and now he has come back to his master. Gone away and done all kinds of horrible things. Now he's come back. And how's God receiving him? Open arms. Thank you. I've been waiting on you. I've been thinking about you. I've been worrying about you, and now you've come back. You are now again a son of mine. Okay.
That's really how far the Jews had fallen in their day, in such position as those tax collectors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was a terrible thing. It really was, and the people were suffering greatly because of this. Yeah.
Well, and just think about it's just amazing how you think about God's wisdom. You think Jesus going into a place would go to the people who were being downtrodden by the tax collectors, but Jesus goes into the household of the person that everybody hated,
Mm-hmm.
and they're grumbling about it. And then after Zacchaeus turns his life to do the right thing, I'm sure they were happy that Jesus went into that house instead of their own.
Yeah.
Think all the
What's going to happen? Yep.
And how everybody's lives were improved by Jesus' one act.
Can you imagine sitting in your house, huh?
He went to the source of the problem.
He went to the source of it. He addressed the issue. So can you imagine sitting in your house and all of a sudden, I wonder who that is. So you go and there's Zacchaeus. Now, typically, if Zacchaeus came to your house, this was not a good visit. Even today, when the IRS if the IRS knocks on your door, what's your good response going to be? It's kind of like when the police knock. You're thinking, man, what's going to? Here he comes. He knocks on his door, and you can imagine this is a penitent man. So he's having to go back to people that he has defrauded, and he's coming back to them, and he is giving back what he's defrauded them of. And can you imagine? There are going to be some that are going to say, it's about time. You shouldn't have done that in the first place. But how many people are going to say, are welcoming him back, are like the father did? How many of them are welcoming him back like the older son did? That we've been waiting on this. Because listen, he was known. He was known. He may have even grown up in that area, and to see a son of Abraham go to work for the Romans would have been a knife in the heart. And now this son of Abraham is coming back, and they can welcome him back as their kinsman, knowing now that this man is not going to try to defraud them. They're not going to have any problems with him. Listen, I'll pay my taxes as long as you're not trying to extort me, because that's what you were doing.
But in all reality, he probably lost his job the next
Maybe.
time it came around. If he was going to maintain that, he wasn't going to be able to.
He wasn't going to give huge amounts.
Yeah.
He wasn't going to be able to give huge
Well,
amounts.
I think about this too with we all get excited around tax return season because we're getting money back from that's our money.
Yeah.
We overpay. But imagine if the government gave us 4 times as much as an apology.
Yeah.
They'd do a better job of collecting.
We wouldn't fear them near as much, or dislike them, dislike that aspect of it near as much.
Also, it would make him grateful to God. Surely God must have touched this man, and
Sure.
their attitude would have been turned towards God, not just to Zacchaeus,
Sure.
but towards God as well.
Yeah, like we said, they're probably glad that Jesus went to his house instead of to the rabbi in the synagogue. The rabbi was doing fine. Zacchaeus was not.
Well, and it shows, I'm sure the talk around the town. I mean, it's just acts like that really showed why Jesus, like the word of mouth about Jesus, really got around.
Yeah.
Because if he was able to change the heart of somebody like that, then That's
Yeah.
how they talk about it.
All right, so we're done. We're done. We'll pick up that next week. Next week we're on our way to Jerusalem, so we're getting very close to the death and the resurrection. So, all right, 772, right? It's our song of invitation. We want to pray for you. Let us know whatever need you might have while we stand and while we sing. Dear brother, oh, why do you tarry so?
Father, we come to you again as we are preparing to leave this place to embark on a new week. We pray, Father, that you'll be with us, that you'll protect us and care for us, and help us to shun the evil one. Father, we thank you for the opportunity that we have to pray for our brothers and sisters. We pray that you will be with the homes, Kathy and Willie, as they are helping with the flu and their symptoms. We pray, Father, that you will be with the ones that are in nursing homes, and we pray that you will bless them and be with their caregivers. Father, we pray for the ones who've lost loved ones. We pray for the Bartons as they're on a trip to bury a loved one. Father, we pray that you'll bless them with a safe trip there and back. Father, we pray that you will continue to guide our lives and direct us in the things that we should do and not do. Father, we pray for the one who emailed us today, Ms. Karen. We pray that you will be with her situation as they're dealing with a situation for a visa for a friend. Pray that you'll be with him and help him to be able to resolve the issues that he has, and that he will be able to get a job here in the United States. Continue to be with our country. We pray that you'll help us to overcome the cares that we have